Eric poses a poignant question that enables clients to really look at challenging what's happening. For more than 30 years, he's been working worldwide as an OD consultant with a primary focus on reshaping workplace culture. Currently, he works as a facilitator for organizing culture change initiatives. He's also an executive coach supporting leaders gain clarity and orientation in the frequently disorienting whirlwind of professional life. He's a mediator for executives, management, and project teams whose initiatives have lost their way. His professional principle is good, purposeful work with good people. Change and crossing cultures have been the defining aspects of Eric's life since childhood. He calls himself a global citizen. He has grown up and was educated in the UK. He has lived most of his life in Germany. He spent 8 years in Asia and he currently lives in Munich. I also asked him about what are his interests, and he told me he loves jazz music. And he has a fundamental focus that OD is OD and other work is other work. And he'd like it to be that way. So we have the right person for a session like this. It is going to be a session which is participative, needs your voice, needs his voice, needs co-creation. So please brace yourself up to an engaging conversation, an engaging session. Over to you, Eric.
Thank you very much, Payal. Good afternoon, everybody. We have a challenge here, and apart from the two core questions that we're going to address, and I'll come on to those in detail in just one moment, the challenge is to make this session that we ought to actually be doing live, but yes, we all know about COVID and the restrictions that's placed upon us. This is a session that really needs to be live, because cultivating healthy organizations is all about the quality of our interactions with one another. So with this medium, we'll simply do the best that we can. It's a question that, in my view, every organization, every institution needs to ask themselves this question: what do we want our organization to be? A couple of points on housekeeping. This is going to be a mixture between short presentation sessions, breakout rooms, a couple of mini chat, not sessions, but a few minutes on the chat, etc., etc. When you're in the breakout rooms, a request: please give each other space to talk and try to be concise. We've got far less time now in the 75 minutes that we have than we would have if we had 75 minutes in a face-to-face real workshop environment in a room. Towards the end of the session, we'll have about 15 minutes for questions, which Payal is going to assist me with selecting. Okay. What do you want your organization to be? Think of the organization that you now work with or you work for. Perhaps you're independent. Let's do a quick brain dump in the chat. Payal, could you please pose the question? Thank you. What do you want your organization to be? Just write the first thing that comes to mind. Go. Okay, good. I'm just watching all of these as they're coming up on the chat, and all good stuff. Okay, you can feel free to carry on, but I'm going to continue anyway. That's up to that. We're not going to comment on these. Everybody can see what's written. There's no point in me reading it. The second question: cultivating healthy organizations. What do you understand by a healthy organization? Payal, thank you. Okay, here again, a quick brain dump. Off you go. Very nice. Okay, let me cut you off there. I'm going to make no apologies for cutting you off rudely from time to time during this session, and also Payal will in the breakout rooms, but I'm afraid that's the nature of working online. So please don't blame Payal, and please don't blame me, blame the system. The system doesn't care, and nobody gets hurt if you want to blame somebody for our rudeness in cutting you off. Two questions which we'll come back to in more detail later. Just a good idea, I think, to get a sense of where we are and what we think these concepts actually mean. I'm going to begin in a not very nice place. The place is what's going wrong in organizations, and it's a very similar question to what's going wrong in societies. Wherever we look in the world, and it doesn't matter which country we're based in, and I'm assuming that most people attending this session, you are actually based in India, but the fundamental problems we're facing throughout the world are very, very similar. We look at the destruction of the environment, we look at the abuse of human beings in their positions as employees of companies who most of the time have business models that are designed for exploitation rather than generative business models. Of course, there are exceptions to this. Where does this come from? There are very few of these organizations that we can call healthy. And the fundamental reason is that we've got it wrong. We've got the design of our organizations completely wrong. We use a mechanical metaphor to see what our organizations are. We look upon our organizations as machines to be manipulated and tweaked according to our needs. It goes without saying that every corporation, every company needs to make a profit, otherwise it doesn't exist. It will cease to exist. That's a no-brainer. It also goes without saying that every public institution, every not-for-profit organization has to work within a budget. Otherwise, the institutions will continue to exist and the public will continue to pay for them, but they certainly won't be healthy. And many of the not-for-profit organizations will simply not be able to perform any longer. And most of them are doing, many of them are doing very, very worthwhile work. The mechanical model for our organizations is fundamentally wrong because organizations are alive. At the very basic level, what do we have in organizations? We have people, and we are all, I think, alive. Anybody who's listening to this is very much alive. We're nature. There's nothing revolutionary about this, but we tend to forget it. We interact with one another within the organizational environment. We use pieces of equipment, technology, machines, whatever we might call them, to help the organization do what it intends to do. We could say we interact with the equipment, but I'm not sure that's completely accurate. We organize our organizations under the delusion that we're able to control everything that happens. Well, we can control machines. We can't control people, only in a negative sense. There's no positive means of controlling people. When we make decisions, we often make the assumptions that we know what the outcomes are going to be, but how can we know the future? How is that possible? We may think we know it. We may have desired outcomes, but we don't really know until whatever happens when people interact. If we look at, especially now, one of the things that COVID is highlighting is the degree of psychological stress in society, and particularly in the organization environment. Now, there can't be anything healthy about that. And actually, all psychological stress of this nature is unnecessary. There may be, we can say that possibly psychological stress in personal relationships might be something natural, but that's a different field altogether that we're not going to work on here. We're going to stick to in the focus, we're going to focus continuously on organizations. The problem is a society problem. So what can we do? I think we can do much better. I think that we have to reflect on what we consider an organization to be, what we consider the functions of an organization to be, and what we consider the function of people in organizations to be. I mean, when people say, we talk about a healthy organization, people ask me why I do this work. I say, well, why wouldn't we want to cultivate a healthy organization? After all, especially in the Western world, I'm not sure what the proportions are in India, but here where I live, we spend about 50% of our waking time in the work environment. If we take out approximately 8 hours that we sleep every night, and mostly the working days these days is way beyond the standard 8 hours that it used to be in the 70s and 1980s. So we've got a fundamental shift there. So what can we do better? What does can a healthy organization look like? And this is all, health is so much to do with feeling, and we'll come on to the details much later. But first of all, I've got some questions for you. In a few moments, not yet, Payal, I'm going to ask you to go into breakout groups of 4 to 5 people. Here's the situation. You all work in the same company, all 4 or 5 of you. The new corporate leadership recognizes that you need to change your way of working so that you can attract and keep the best people, and also to improve your profitability. Funnily enough, this new corporate leadership also cares about you as individuals. It's now October 2023, so we're 2 years ahead of ourselves. And 2 years after this new initiative has started, everything's looking pretty good. Discuss for 10 minutes the following questions. Payal, can you put them up, please? In small groups, briefly talk about these questions with one another. Go inside yourself, and you're actually living this situation now. How do you feel at the start of each day on your way to work? What are you saying to yourself? Briefly talk about how people interact with one another when problems arise in the company, because problems always arise, that's nature. What do people say when they talk about your company as an employer? 10 minutes as a group, just to talk generally about these questions. Give each other space, try to keep your answers succinct. Okay, and after 10 minutes, can you bring us back into the large room? Thank you.
Okay. Payal, are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing it. I'm done. Okay, everyone. So Jay, I'm going to get into a breakout room.
Before we move on, let's get a few sound bites from some of the conversations in the group. I'm just going to pick out a couple of people at random and ask you just for a very, very brief summary. maximum 30, 40 seconds. And if I pick out two people who've been in the same group, the second person just tell me and we'll move on. So, Sushil, I can see you on my screen, so welcome.
The first question that how we will feel like when we are going for the work. So the group said that we will be feeling like purpose driven. There will be peppiness in our walk, isn't it? Happiness on our faces. And there will be a sense of pride and looking forward to go to the work. That was the question number one. Question number two, bring it means like when the problem is coming. So we as a group will be eager to solve problem because of the collaborative approach which is there. Free flow of authentic information has to be there, and conflict has to be seen as a way of creation and co-creation. The thing, collective problem solving has to be there, correct? So that is the way, correct, we will look into the problem solving, because you have said that organization, right, which takes care of you as well as the profit one. And the third one, yeah.
Sushil, thank you very much. Let's move on. Meeta Sharma, I can see you in my screen, so please.
Thank you, Eric. It was a good discussion. We were 4 of us to start with, and the fourth person dropped, so we were just left with 3. So essentially, to answer the first question, the thoughts were very much aligned. All of us were excited to go back to office. Would you like me to answer all 3?
Start with the third one, because we haven't had a comment on that yet.
All right. So what do people say about your company as an employer? We couldn't actually reach there. So...
Okay, then just tell us what you did talk about. That's fine.
Sure, thank you. So we were talking about how would people deal with the problem in 2023? The collective response was people will be more collaborative because they have tasted the flavor of working in silos while they're working from home. There will be a hybrid model where people will have the facility or the option to go to workplace and work from there or contribute from wherever they are. So that was one, a common answer that came in. However, there were also concerns about how will the culture evolve, since people would have gotten very comfortable with working from home, and this is not to pinpoint at the people who are behind the cameras, but staying behind the cameras, so the visibility becomes zero. How will the leadership evolve? The ownership also, sometimes takes a backseat if you're speaking from behind the camera. So, these remain some of the concerns.
Thank you very much. You're highly important points to also highlighting the restrictions under which we are currently having to work wherever we are in the world. It's not the same. Working online is not a substitute for working face-to-face. I always say it's fine for transactional work, but for relational work, we really need to be in the same space, but it's the best we have, so we do the best we can. Okay, one more. Priya, please.
Hi, Eric. So I did quickly summarize. Most of the things are almost similar about the hybrid model. The team did feel that tomorrow it's going to be a hybrid model. People would not like to work all time from home. They want to meet people once in a while and catch up, have smiling faces. A couple of also thoughts came as creative, having a day creative, something to contribute and innovate. And the other points on the second question briefly talk about how people interact with one another. Productive and solution oriented. We had this common and empathy, showing empathy and understanding each other. That's the kind of organization and people they should talk about. Last point, what do people say about your company as an employer? The interesting fact is everybody had this very similar context and everybody came up with the same response. They said, we want the care part. Caring for people-centric, because it's all about humanity and the creation of feel-good factor. So these were a couple of points that was very common in our group, and everybody spoke the same language. So I was pretty amazed with the thoughts.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Let's move on. What actually happens within an organization? What goes on? Just a second. This is a summary, necessarily incomplete, of the interactions that occur in any organization, which themselves are a reflection of culture, the culture of the organization. I will come on to in just a moment what culture actually means. It's generally misunderstood as a concept, which creates all kinds of problems for us. Many years ago, when I began to get involved in this whole field that we refer to as culture, I heard somebody say that the culture of an organization is who speaks to whom about what, when, how. And I liked it. And I still use it, but not as a definition of culture. Culture is actually a notion that is beyond definition. It's a dynamic. So dynamics don't have definitions because they're continuously changing. Otherwise, they couldn't be dynamic. But it's a very, very good starting point. If we're talking about healthy organizations, if we're serious about talking about healthy organizations, we need to talk about the quality of the interactions in these organizations. Every single one of these bubbles that you can see here are questions for people in the organization to answer themselves. Questions and the answers they will want are actually those that reflect the culture they want. Hierarchies. We hear an awful lot of nonsense spoken about hierarchies. Yes, we want an organization without hierarchies. Well, let's stop dreaming. There are always hierarchies. The problem is not whether or not there are hierarchies. The question is, what do the hierarchies actually mean in everyday life? How are decisions made? Who makes which decisions? Are we talking about the classic 19th, early 20th century models of, decisions only being made at the highest possible level? Or are we talking about decisions being made not at the lowest possible level, but the decisions being made by the people who have the know-how, the skills, the experience, and the engagement in the issues to be part of that decision? What are the leadership styles and what are the management styles in the organization? We need management. We can't manage living systems, but we certainly need management for processes, et cetera, et cetera. The question of responsibility. Are people encouraged to take responsibility for their work? Or are they just perceived, to put it as in a negative contrast, as objects to perform? Structures. We always need structures. Structures provide freedom to move. If we take the analogy of any sport that we care to think of, the sports have rules. The playing field is outlined, when the ball is in, when the ball is out, what happens, et cetera, et cetera. We need structures. Every organization needs structures. The question about structures is, what are they encouraged to promote and what are they encouraged to prevent or to hinder? And now we come to the fundamental points. How do people engage with each other? How do the employees and the organizational leadership and the organization administration engage with one another, which with quality? The same goes for the interactions between the organization and customers and the organization and suppliers. Are they seen as partners or are they seen as cogs in a wheel? I'm exaggerating, of course, by presenting these binary comparisons. There are very few binary comparisons actually in everyday life. What is the effect of the interactions within the organizations on your interaction with your family and your friends and the local community in which you live? What is the effect on your the quality of your interactions in the organization on the lives of the customers and the lives of your suppliers? Hey, these are also people. These are also human beings. You may have realized by now, I tend to have a very human orientation. When we're talking about the organization as a system, the border of the organization is not the border of the system. That goes well beyond. Just think of how any interaction with your spouse or your children on the morning before you actually leave and go to your place of work, assuming we'll be able to do that again very shortly, how that will affect your mood on the day and how that will affect your interaction with some of your colleagues there. Now, this is incomplete, of course, but the key question we need to ask here is, what is the quality of interactions that we're looking for in our organization? How do we want to speak with one another? Do we want to speak to one another, or do we want to speak with one another? The work of cultivating healthy organizations, the work of cultivating quality relationships with one another. So what do we mean by culture? And this is so important in the work that we do. Notice here, I don't say culture is. When we think of culture, I think of the continuously evolving dynamic interaction of the mindsets and the gut sets of all the actors in the system. Gut sets, it's important. How do we feel about what's happening? Because going back to here, with every interaction that takes place, the culture changes. Nothing is static whatsoever. And how you feel about the conversation you had with one of your colleagues or your boss or somebody who reports to you may well affect how you interact with the next person you meet who is external to the organization. It may be a member of your family, it may be a customer, it may be a supplier, it may be somebody else, it may be a business partner, or similarly, it will affect the quality of your interaction with somebody else within the organization. So we're operating here in a dynamic field. There's nothing static whatsoever. And the same is health. When we wake up every morning, we feel different to the way we woke up the previous morning. And we know that tomorrow morning we'll feel different again. We can't necessarily say how, we can't necessarily define what's different about it, but it is different. I'm making the assumption here that most people listening are working somehow in the field of organization development or organization design. Your facilitators, bumped into one or two people here who are working in the social innovation sphere. You may be consultants, you may be coaches, whoever. So what is the purpose of organization development? And for me, it's quite simple. It's a highly complex field, but the purpose is quite simple. It's to cultivate a healthy organization. Because if we're not doing that, what on earth are we doing? Why are we here if we're not attempting to cultivate a healthy organization? Let's look now at what this means. What do we mean when we speak about healthy organizations? And I'm going to ask you now to go into breakout rooms again, only for 5 minutes this time, with this very specific question. So Payal, can I ask you to put up the question for the second breakout? Who am I without my health? And if so, what are the consequences? 5 minutes, off we go. everybody. So who am I without my health? And what do we mean when we talk about health? Let's move on in terms of the time restriction that we've got. Excuse me. Organizational health. What do we mean, or what do I mean when I talk about healthy organizations, when we speak about the characteristics? I very consciously put ethical health in the middle. Why? And because it's fundamental, I think, to anything that we do. Excuse me, I'm getting some signals here. Okay. Ethics is fundamental to everything we do. Now, personally, when I speak about ethics, I mean ethics that deserve the description. We know there's an awful lot of manipulation of language going on these days. Now, for me, what is fundamental to ethics and what lies at the very core of ethics is the concept of human dignity. We're talking about work where individual people are seen as people, as human beings, not as performers of tasks. If we look at the other characteristics, we'll see how they're all related. We've spoken about economic health already. It's a no-brainer that companies need to be economically healthy, as do all institutions, otherwise they will no longer exist. We don't even need to talk about that. So often we hear, yes, but what about the profits? I mean, for me, that's a very banal question. Yes, we have to make profits. The question is how. In our group, we were talking about we were talking about physical health. Who am I without my health? If I don't feel healthy, well, what am I able to do? And the answer is not very much. If I'm not feeling good about myself, if I'm not feeling good about the environment in which I'm working, in which I'm living, in which I'm interacting, it's going to affect my physical health. What about the leadership? How's that going to affect how I feel about what I'm doing? What about the kind of work I'm doing? Is the product or the service that we're working with ethical or not? I'm very open and say I absolutely refuse point blank to work with the military or to work with armaments manufacturers. For me, that's not ethical. That's just one example. We all have to make those decisions for ourselves. The community health. An organization is a community in which people work. So how do we cultivate healthy organizations? We cultivate an environment in which people are able to thrive. So psychological health is automatically there. We're going to have less physical sickness. People are going to work more effectively. They're going to look at the technological processes that need to be efficient. We need to be effective. The processes need to be efficient. The quality of the products will be higher. This is all going to affect the economic health of the company. Health is a relational question. Everything that goes on in an organization is relational. Which part of the organization are we looking at here when we talk about organizational health? Especially if we work in large organizations, we tend to think of, well, okay, it's only about my department. I don't care what the service section does, as long as I can make my sales. Well, that's not very productive. This too is fundamental. Organizational health is holistic. The organization you work in is one entity. and it's one whole entity. We need to stop thinking in terms of a fragmented world that we so often get caught up in. A healthy organization for me is an organization which, when you look at the people, they are working there because they want to work there, not just because they need to work there in order to feed their families, but they work there because they think, this is where I belong. This is worthwhile for me. Now imagine what could happen to organization results if this environment were cultivated. It's again a no-brainer. I again ask the question, why wouldn't you want to cultivate a healthy organization? And we'll come in a few minutes to what this whole question of community in relation to an organization is supposed to mean. First, however, let's look at how we do this work. Now, I'm going to speak for about 3 minutes, and obviously I can't speak in detail in 3 minutes about how we can cultivate a healthy organization. So this is an overview, and what I'm showing you here is a framework. It is not a model. These are the things that need to be in place for the work to happen. We focus first primarily on what we're supposed to be doing. We need a clear purpose and a clear focus for the work we're doing. We hear a lot of talk at the moment about complexity. I suggest we ignore that talk, because complexity merely describes the nature of living systems, of living organisms. It's nothing more and nothing less than that. So we work with its inherent complexity. We always have to see. Payal, can I ask you to mute everybody, please, apart from myself? Thank you.
Jay, could you help us with that?
The initiative has to be actively and visibly led by the senior decision makers in the organization. Everybody who's a senior decision maker is walking around with an invisible label on their forehead saying, I am the CXO, or whatever the title might be. People look up to them. They are the example for what goes on. At the same time, healthy organizations make decisions collectively. There's so much know-how within every group, and that know-how is recognized, and the will of people to contribute is recognized. So the two, it's not a paradox, it's a polarity, and it's not a contradiction at all. But the visible leadership of the senior people is absolutely essential. The group knows what it knows, what it needs, even if it doesn't know that it knows. And this is where we need the external facilitation. How can we open a space that brings out and lets rise to the surface what it is that the group really needs? What are the core questions that it's not asking themselves? Trust is another notion that's often talked about. What I call a trust space is a space where it's about feeling. Trust is only a feeling. It's very delicate. It's like a delicate flower. It can be there at one moment, but if we're not cultivating it, it will die very, very quickly. Dialogic conversations. Fundamental to the work I do is the work of David Bohm on dialogue. David Bohm, in his work, he talks about shared meaning as the glue that holds people and societies together. How can we create spaces for these dialogic conversations to occur? And again, we're looking at the whole all of the time. Again, referring to David Bohm, he speaks of undivided wholeness in flowing movement. It's the dynamic of the culture of the organization. it's not possible to do this work. Here's a bit of a paradox as well. It's not possible to do this work if you try to facilitate it internally. Everybody within the organization has an interest. Of course, an external facilitator has an interest too, but he or she doesn't have an interest in the decisions that you're actually making. The politics should stay out of it in theory, but that's part of the facilitator's skill there. That's a very, very quick run through. And what I would like to do now is we've got 18 minutes left. I'd like to use about 15 minutes for questions that you may have. Now, Payal, I don't know, are there any questions in the chat?
Not yet, not yet. We've not been asked for them.
Then that's something we forgot. You see, we're all human beings and we forget to do things we intend to as well, however experienced we are. So if anybody has questions, can you please raise your hand? And I'm going to ask you to present your question very succinctly in one brief sentence. Now, I can't see the whole screen, Payal. Maybe you could see more people than me and call out somebody.
So can I request you to either raise your hand, unmute yourself, or put your question in chat, and then we can see what shows up. Any questions? Yes, Shushi, do you unmute yourself?
Yeah, Eric, thank you very much for showing these principles of a healthy organization. I would like to know, like, as you are saying that living organisms like human beings are working over there. So how you imagine or how you describe a living organism who is working in a healthy organization?
How do I describe a living organism within working in an organization? Well, let's suppose I'm an employee of organization ABC. I am a living organism. And so are all of the other 10 or 100 or 10,000 people in that organization. We are alive. We are living organisms. Every single one of us. Each one of us comes with our own specific characteristics. We bring our own uniqueness of being as a person, our own skills, our know-how, our experience, etc., etc. So when we begin interacting with one another, let's say that for the sake of argument, I'm working in a core team with 6 other people. There are 7 of us there bringing our own uniqueness to it. And there's a dynamic. And there's little that we can predict about what will happen if one person says this in a particular way or something else in a particular way. This is the dynamic of organizations being alive. And we have to work with this. And we need to answer the questions together, the questions that arise together. I don't know if that answers your question, Susha.
Thank you.
We have another question, Dipti. I'm going to read this on your behalf, assuming you can't unmute yourself. So Dipti is sharing, is there a way to diagnose the organizational health holistically, as companies have different departments nowadays looking at employee climate or sustainability or community development?
Okay, thank you very much, Dipti, for the question. There absolutely is a way to diagnose organizational health, but it's not through departments. Setting up departments to do this is the wrong way to do it. The only way to diagnose organizational health, and this is the experience I've made, is through interviews and focus groups. We need to have conversations. Conversations lie at the core of what's going on. I will not enter any kind of initiative like this or to solve a serious, to overcome a serious problem without doing a diagnosis first. And my diagnosis consists of, I will ask the decision maker, my contractor, I'll say, give me a list of the key people that I need to speak with. And you're one of them, always. What we need are multiple perspectives of what's going on. An interview gives us the possibility to ask supplementary questions all the time. if we just conduct an online survey, well, what goes into that online survey? The mood of the person when they're filling it out. Are they doing it because they think they have to? Are they doing it because they want to? What's their mood at the time? There are no supplementary questions. It's purely digital. Here we're talking about us as human beings. We're alive. We want to answer, we want to pick up the tone, not only the words, but the tone of what they're saying. If we get a cross section, of course, in a large organization, if we've got a 10-person organization, we can interview everybody. If we've got a 10,000-person organization, well, first of all, we can't interview everybody. And secondly, we don't need to. But what we do need are a cross section of the crucial people. How that we define that cross section, that's something you need to work out with the contractor. But it's only via interviews that we can reflect what we need to reflect there. So I would say, yeah, the diagnosis is absolutely essential, but let's do it in a manner that reflects the message we're trying to place. I can see another question here, and then I can see Pavni has got her hand showing. Let me deal with this one from Venkatesh quite quickly. How do we understand organizations who sometimes behave contrary to their envisioned values? Well, you know, what meaning do values have if they're not lived? If they behave differently, then I would say the values that they claim are not their values. It's as simple as that. There's a paradox with values as well. I think we need to take a little bit of care. Something I've learned, and it's something to reflect on, I'm just going to put it out there. As soon as we talk about a value as a value, is it really a value? Or does it become something else? Does it become something we aspire to, which means that we're not actually in the present? Now, I just want to leave that question with you because it's something I think about continuously.
Thank you. Thank you. Very helpful.
Pavni, I can see your hand.
Yes, I have a question. Earlier, you were speaking about building trust within the organization. So do you feel that since we've completely shifted to a work from home environment, I mean, some of us are working in a hybrid environment, but most of us are working from home. So do you feel that building trust has taken a backseat in this environment? And if yes, what do you suggest? I mean, how do you suggest can this be improved? Because I'm in an organization where trust is one of the most important of the 5 values that they boast about. So in my experience, this has been true. So what do you feel? You know, how can we get above this?
Thank you. First things first, I never speak about building trust. I speak about cultivating trust. It's an important distinction. We build constructions, one on top of the other. That's not how trust works. Trust is a feeling. We have to cultivate it. We trust or we don't trust according to how we experience what's going on in our environments. How I experience, how I interpret, for example, how you interact with me, just as an example, and so on. So I think that is highly significant. Working in what is called a hybrid in value is becoming a bit of a trendy word, this, isn't it? Hybrid. When something becomes trendy, then like some red flags start going off in my world. Out of necessity, most of us are working from home these days. I really enjoy, you know, especially these days, the workshops I'm able to do live here at the moment, you know, so I like people. it's far more difficult to cultivate this feeling of trust via this environment that we're in now, this video environment, because we don't have access to all of our senses. What's the energy in the room? What's the room? We're in different rooms. You know, we're 30, 40, 50 people here in this session in 30 or 40 different rooms. How can we cultivate trust there? It's so much more difficult. It's also a notion, trust, that I think far too few organizations take seriously. They treat it as quite objectively, but how can you objectify a notion? It can't be done. I think we need to reconsider how we approach this whole notion of trust, and reconsider how essential it is, because without trust, the relationship is purely transactional. So obviously I'm not going to comment on your organization. I don't know it and I can't comment on it. But I would say that if they really mean that it's important, then I suggest asking some questions about it.
I completely agree with you on this. And what I feel is what we miss upon is the informal conversations, because when you're working from home, you are mostly talking about work. You only call when you have, to get some work done, or, you have to report to your managers, or vice versa. Whereas when we are working from offices and we were physically there, so there used to be a lot of informal conversations which helps build trust, which we are missing right now. So I think that is one reason, that is the main reason I feel, which has led to, a gap, a sort of gap between employees and their managers and so on.
Absolutely, it's one of the problems. Thank you, Pavni. I can see Don has his hand raised. I don't know if anybody else does. So Don, yes. This might be the last question, actually. Yeah.
So Eric, we've seen that a lot of companies, of course, they're getting, quite a few of them are getting depersonalized, if I were to use that word, whether it is using gig workers or gig employees, whether part-time employees from different geographies. There is a lot of companies which are deconstructing their models to be only doing the core. And, on one hand, you have a lot of new age companies which are looking at cashing out the moment they get, to IPO. So it's very transactional oriented, if we look at it, that the entire corporate, model is moving towards. And in this process, the entire organization development is more about core, about emotions, about connect, about engagement, which is like a soul. But if the soul itself begins to, waver, how do you see this playing out in the next couple of years based on this extrapolation?
You're asking me to predict, are you? I'm not a futurist. I'm not going to make any predictions. I see the same trends as you, and they concern me, because actually they're exacerbating all the problems we're talking about. So, especially in the startup scene, where over here in Germany, especially, I have quite a lot of contact too. And I hear the supposedly social message combined with the transactional nature of their work and their activities. And it doesn't fit, and it's not healthy, and I completely reject it. I don't know how it's going to pan out, but what I do know is that we can all play our role in doing what we think is right and what we think is appropriate. And in the end, everything we do, it starts with me, doesn't it? It's I make my decisions. Now, all of us know there are some people who are doing a job and taking on roles because they need to feed their family. Of course, we have to accept that, and they don't want to be there. So then I'd say to the leadership of the corporation, what do you want your organization to be? Because if you don't want it to be a healthy organization, you're actually throwing away money. If you only focus on profits, you're throwing away money. You have no way of actually accessing and bringing to the surface all of the potential that's there. So what you're doing is throwing away money. Now, I don't know of any good leader or manager who would actually consciously work in that direction. But hey, look, they are doing so, but not necessarily consciously. So that's all I can say on that.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's round up.
I wanted to make one observation. Do you have time for that?
Just a very brief one, please. Yes.
Very brief, yeah. I think my observation is that before the pandemic, people learned to live with low trust. And now during the virtual reality, the need for trust has become higher. And the ability to distrust whatever, and they're very keen on seeing where you're manipulating or where you're telling the truth. So I think therefore the need to be more genuine is higher today than ever before.
I will absolutely agree with your sentiment, Sushma. Is it higher? Is the need to be more genuine higher than before? I'm not sure. I personally believe we always have this need to be genuine. So we're absolutely aligned on the sentiment. And this is where we have the limits, because if this were coming towards the end of a real life session, we'd say, let's go and have a cup of tea and continue the conversation.
Yeah.
Because these are so important conversations. Thank you. Give me 2 minutes to round up, please. Sushma will continue anyway. We'll message. Yeah, we'll message.
Yes.
Let's just round up.
Yeah.
A gentleman that many of you will know, who I love to read, Krishnamurti. And everything he says is about life, and everything, there's so much in all of it. And this is a question. Is it possible for a mind that is twisted, broken, fragmentary, to see everything clearly and innocently? We're tortured human beings. There's no question about it. Our minds have been tortured and are tortured. And how can such a mind see things very clearly? To find that out, because we are learning, not stating things, to find that out, one must go into the question of experience, the personal experience of everybody. Now, when did he say this? At least 30 years ago, 40 years ago. What has changed in our world? Personally, I don't think nearly enough. I think we're missing the fundamental questions, which is the reason I do this work. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much for having me. Very happy if any of you decide that you'd like to take up contact. I'm always interested in supporting organizations doing good work, what I consider, that aligns with my ethics of good work. So feel free to contact me. The ideas here are actually further presented in Dancing with Change, which you can access either from my website or via Amazon. Payal, can I ask you?